Welcome everyone to our live event, Do More with Data, Snowflake, Semantic Views, and AI in Hex. And so let's take a quick look at these poll results before we dive in. Let's see. Okay, so first question, have you used semantic models in the past? It looks like the majority of folks are actually just getting started and hoping to learn more. That's perfect. You're in exactly the right place for that. And it also looks like most folks here have not yet tried Snowflake Semantic Views. It's a pretty recent innovation. That's why we have this exciting webinar. And Josh is one of our speakers here, who I'll introduce in just a moment, who is, of course, the expert and PM on all things Snowflake Semantic Views. So you're, again, in the right place to be learning about all of this. So to introduce myself, and also next slide, please. I'm Nicole, your host for today's webinar. I am here with Josh, head of product management at Snowflake, and also two wonderful members of our Hex team, Carlos, who's a lead PM here at Hex, and Armin, who is a lead partner engineer. And so we've got an exciting 1-hour session planned ahead of us. Again, it is being recorded as we speak, and we will be sharing it out afterwards in an email. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So Armin will be the one to first kick us off with an overview of Hex. And then Josh will be giving us an intro to Snowflake Semantic Views. And then the part of the webinar where this all comes together is in our product demo. And so that's really where we'll be spending most of our time showing you an end-to-end workflow, and that'll include creating semantic views, syncing them into Hex, then doing no-code visual analysis on top of those, like trusted governed metrics. And then one of my favorite parts is, and we'll also show you how to use AI in Hex to ask questions on your model data. So it's a packed agenda with lots of great stuff that we're planning to cover, but we will set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the very end for Q&A. So we're all really looking forward to the questions that you have for us, again, especially since these are pretty new innovations from both Hex and Snowflake. And so throughout the webinar, just throw questions in the Q&A box. I think some of those we'll try to address like as we go along, and then the rest we'll just try to aim to cover as many as we can at the end in the Q&A. So that's everything, I think. I will just pass it over to Armin to take it away from here.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. So we'll maybe first start with what is Hex. Maybe some folks have used Hex in the past. Maybe folks have just heard about it. So ultimately, lay some ground floor. We are the only unified platform for data impact. And to best unpack this, maybe we first look at the types of problems we try to solve with our joint customer bases. And the common thing that we keep seeing and hearing is there's an infinite demand from insights, but the data teams can't keep up. And the reason for this is one of three main buckets, if you will, that parlay into each other. The first of which being this concept around fragmented tooling. Many of you probably have one or multiple BI tools. You maybe have folks in Excel, you have SQL runners or notebooks, and this can become rather expensive. It's time consuming and leads to siloed workflows. Where you're doing these analyses, you're creating screenshots, maybe one-off dashboards, you're moving things into PowerPoint slides, you're sharing code snippets via email or Teams or Slack. It's rather unreliable. It decreases the trust within the organization. And once you finally do create that final asset, whatever it may be, a dashboard or some sort of screenshot in a PowerPoint slide, the end stakeholders typically have these one-off quick questions. They may see a spike in data. They maybe have just additional curiosity about what you presented to them. And then they'll ask a follow-up question. And then you have to kind of unwind everything, go back to this fragmented world that you had to come from, just to try to answer these one-off questions. Some of these times, these assets are static. They're not necessarily quick to respond with. And then ultimately, you are left with a low impact asset rather than being that kind of high impact data team member. So how are we trying to fix this? At the core of what we're trying to do here is basically bridge the gap between our data team members and the business users, the folks working on the technical problems, the ones that can really drive the business forward, and bridge that to the decision makers, the marketers, the operations, the sales folks. So diving a little bit further on how Hex tries to solve or bridge this proverbial gap. We have three main pillars, and that's kind of the best way to think about Hex as a platform. The first primary pillar is around our analytics and data science workflows. This is our end-to-end notebook. We'll be spending plenty of time in here where folks that are, relatively data savvy all the way up to your ML engineers can access to SQL cells, Python cells, native Hex visuals, AI code assistants, and the like. They can then take these raw assets in this kind of technical form and turn it into a very interactive, sexy data app. And this is where we're kind of exposing or doing that first bridge to these non-technical users. This can be both internal and external stakeholders. And then lastly, what is really exciting and kind of maybe why everyone is tuning in today, or maybe thinking about like chatbots or talking with your data, this idea of AI-powered self-exploration. That's kind of the last pillar of Hex that we're really diving into. And maybe it's worthwhile actually taking some time to talk through this and what we're seeing within our customer bases and just in the market in general. And maybe this kind of parlays into some of the things that you all are trying to do today. So I think the best way to kind of start this conversation or to think about this is around a user workflow, particularly around any sort of chatbot you want to take. We're very comfortable with chatbots these days, whether it be like Googling or OpenAI, and we're trying to bring this into the world of our enterprise data. So one of the best ways to kind of do this is obviously bringing in semantic views or semantic modeling. So I may have a Slack bot to start with this, and I ask a question like, how many customers are at risk to churn this month? This gives back me an answer. Let's say it's 10 customers. Now, this is pretty much a governed asset where I have a semantic model behind the scenes, kind of providing these additional guardrails for my chatbot. But then I go and say, it's actually the end of the quarter, and I really want to do some outreach for these customers. I want to dive a little bit deeper and drill down into this data. So I may go out to my BI tool and I start trying to drill down, but I very quickly noticed that the number is actually different than what my chatbot gave me. Here, I'm actually saying there's 50 customers at risk. So because I'm relatively data savvy, I realized that my dashboarding here isn't actually backed by that same semantic modeling or that governance that my chatbot is. So what can I do here? Well, because it's kind of a time crunch, I don't have time to go back to my data team to try to resolve this or answer it for me. So I may jump into a notebook environment where I kind of have this like off-road experience. I can just maybe query my semantic modeling directly with SQL cells, or maybe we go and do some risk score assessment or build a customer churn model. So I kind of have back again this ability to have these governed metrics and a lot of exploration, but I can't really share this asset out. It's very code dependent. It's a ton of SQL, ton of Python. So I may go out and try to build some sort of data app that can run in parallel. And in this case, I built out a customer churn model, but this whole workflow is rather fragmented. And it would kind of resolve the initial problem I had just to get something out the door, but it's not necessarily trusted, and I don't feel that comfortable going forward with this. And this is maybe kind of the impetus for how we all should really be thinking about semantic modeling and how this can parlay itself into these chatbots, how to talk with your data. You really need to have these kind of trusted layer of metrics across all of these different aspects. And you think what we believe is that you need to think about chatbots as being a part of your tool stack rather than just a bolt-on solution and add-on that someone goes to. You can really be a powerful launching point for diving deeper into explorations. So the way we're trying to kind of position ourselves or think about this as we're shaping our product and our offerings to customers is making sure you can get consistent answers powered by your semantic model, no matter the interface that you're interacting with. So whether if we go back to those kind of three pillars of Hex, if you're a technical persona working in this kind of notebook world, right, you should have that same governed metrics bleeding from the notebook into your data apps. And then if you want to provide this self-service exploration, just ask any verbose question, you should have that same level of governance being backed by it as well. All to say, if you were thinking about AI, specifically around creating chatbots, what you really need to be thinking about is semantic modeling and the strategy you want to deploy with it. So with that, obviously, we'll pass it off to Josh to walk us through semantic modeling in Snowflake, formerly known as Semantic Views.
Thanks, Armin. And yeah, that was a great tee up because my favorite topic is semantic modeling. And I think the way that you characterized this idea of having a kind of a shared consistent interface across clients, whether that client is kind of the initial BI exploration you did, maybe an app that you want to build, or that conversational experience that's answering the quick questions, having that shared interface, we think is really, really critical. And that's why we launched Semantic Views in Snowflake. We announced Semantic Views publicly at our summit in June, so just a little, maybe it was a month ago. Just for this express purpose, how do you provide that shared interface across these clients? And one of the things we're really excited about, I love the diagram you showed, kind of showing the interaction with the various surfaces, is that as you're doing that analysis, uh, the combination of the data curator, but also the consumer of that data, it's kind of like a teamwork thing. You're asking a new question, you identify a new metric definition, um, by making sure that there's like a loop of ask a question, form a new perspective, be able to feed that back into the semantic layer, is super valuable. So the synchronization that we've got between Hex and semantic views, I think, is really compelling there. Uh, so in addition to that kind of shared layer for consistent understanding, if you go to the next slide, one of the things that I'm an old school semantic modeling person. I know that maybe it's a new topic to folks on the um, some folks on the phone, but or on the call. But what you can kind of think about semantic modeling is providing this abstraction or roadmap that takes away the complexity of an underlying schema that may be a bunch of tables, interrelated tables, complex joins, column names that are hard to reason about, or even calculations that aren't well defined. Kind of how do you calculate net profit? How do you calculate net margin? How do you deal with kind of active customers or non-active customers or internal customers or external customers? All of that stuff is hard to infer when you're looking at a base schema. And when you start to bring AI and conversational analytics to a base schema, things get exacerbated. And so semantic models are a way of kind of abstracting away the complexity of the underlying schema and providing an interface that is easy for a consumer, whether that consumer is a human or that consumer is an LLM. And what we're showing here is actually what happens as schema complexity increases, going from 1 to 2 tables to multiple tables with complex relationships. And as question complexity increases, you're not just asking about show me sum of sales, you're asking for a window function metric, you're asking for a complex filter that defines a ratio or an active customer. If you let an LLM loose on a base schema with these complex questions, the quality of responses really degrades. When you bring a semantic layer or a semantic model that kind of abstracts away this complexity and gives the LLM kind of human readable or business readable context to ask these questions, you get much improved kind of consistency of answers. Uh, Again, semantic models have been around for a long time in the world of BI. If you're familiar with kind of tools like a MicroStrategy or a business objects or um, Cognos, all of these things had the context of semantic models, but those semantic models kind of existed in the world of the BI tool. What we've done with Semantic Views and Snowflake is we've moved those down to the data platform layer. So analytical clients as well as conversational clients can talk to them. And if you go to the next slide, Armin, I'll just give kind of a semantic model 101. And we'll see this, I think, live in a demo soon. When you're defining a semantic model, semantic view in Snowflake, we start with the base schema. That base schema could be some tables, it could be some views. And what you define as the data curator is the relationship between those tables. So you identify these are the keys. This is how store sales relates to the date dimension or the customer dimension. And once you've established that base schema, what you expose to the consumer are simple things like metrics and dimensions, count of customers, what is the city, what is the stock symbol. And this is really where whether you're kind of a human interface or a programmatic interface or an agentic interface, talking in terms of metrics and dimensions is a lot easier than talking in terms of tables and relationships and joins. On top of this, we've exposed with semantic views a standard SQL dialect. So just like you can create a table or a view, you can create a semantic view in Snowflake. You can describe a semantic view, and you can execute a query against that semantic view. And if you go to the next slide, in addition to kind of having that SQL-based interface to semantic views, you can have an AI-based interface. So you can use Snowflake's Cortex Analyst experience or Snowflake Intelligence. Partners like Hex have talked to your data experiences. So what you're getting here is regardless of the interface you want to use, whether that's you want to write a SQL statement, you want to use a natural language interface, you want to use a data exploration tool like Explore and Hex, you are going to get consistent answers. And I can tell you from past experience working in large data teams, you can spend if you have two BI tools, you may spend 50 to 60% of your time explaining why those two BI tools have different answers. If you think about what happens when you start to have a conversational experience, when you start to have those quick questions that you can answer via natural language, and you're expanding to, instead of two BI tools, thousands or hundreds of consumers in your organization, you now have the opportunity to get that answer wrong or different many, many times. So this semantic view as kind of that shared language that delivers consistent results is really critical.
Josh, I just want to jump in real quick because you mentioned that this was announced at Snowflake Summit about a month ago. So I'm curious, like, how have you seen Snowflake customers sort of in that time adopt this for like downstream reporting and being able to really ask questions of their data?
Yeah, well, I'd say kind of the response to semantic views has been overwhelming. I'm probably doing right now 3 to 4 customer calls a day. Uh, and, because we just announced the feature, I would say kind of there's early adoption and early POCs going on. And the very, like I would say probably without fail, the teams that we're working with are traditional data science teams, business intelligence teams that have built kind of BI and exploration oriented data products. And they're trying to figure out, how do I unlock AI? They all have this mandate, which is, okay, like CFO wants to talk to the data, CEO wants to just ask a question and get an answer back. And they're very interested in that, but they're also a little bit scared. The question I like to ask those customers is, how often is it okay for that answer to be wrong? And if the answer is more than one, that's probably bad. It should never be wrong. And so this idea of the semantic view that provides kind of a safe way to project data even to AI experiences while delivering the consistent dashboard, so that if the CEO asks a question and then goes and looks at the dashboard, the answer is the same. Uh, it's really resonating with folks.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. I mean, I feel like having the semantic model just live close to where your data lives just feels right. So I was wondering if you could even just elaborate a little bit on like why you all decided to even bring semantic modeling to the warehouse in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you described, which is maybe the overused term is shifting left. But what we've heard is instead of having that semantic content live in a client, like on the consumption side, where it can only be kind of where it's constrained to a single consumer, having it shift left and down and be at the data platform level allows multiple tools to benefit from those same semantics. And it's not that we're the front end for that consumption. This is why I really like this stuff with Hex, which is that kind of as you're learning and as people are interacting with the data, Hex is a natural way to explore and enrich and kind of generate new ideas. But being able to push that back down so that someone who's working on a notebook can benefit from it, someone who's delivering an AI-powered experience, or maybe they're building a Streamlit app, uh, making sure that you have that consistency across the interfaces is really important.
Amazing. Thank you.
Should we jump into a little demo?
I would love to see a demo. I'm excited.
Let's do it. Maybe we first start with the audience of just showing maybe a tangible example of what a semantic view looks like on the Snowflake side.
Sounds
So
good.
here's one. This is a test instance. We'll be working on some fake B2B sales data. But one of the things I highlight here is there's this kind of new semantic view object. Maybe Josh, you wanna highlight some of its kind of benefits of becoming really a native object rather than living just, you said, in some like downstream reporting tools or maybe in like a GitHub repo, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think there's maybe two really big things I would call out with the semantic view as a native object. The first is you can now treat it like you would treat a table or a view. You can secure it like any other securable schema object. That means you can grant access to particular roles. You can secure it and make sure that the right users are accessing the data. If there are masking policies or kind of data controls on the underlying data, those get respected by the semantic view in Snowflake. So just from a security and also a manageability perspective, Snowflake semantic views participate in things like data replication. So if you have a multi-region deployment of Snowflake and you want to turn on replication, semantic views get replicated just like the rest of the objects in your database. So that's kind of number one, is kind of the security and management and platform niceties. And the second is, because we've implemented it as a native object, we can actually compile queries directly against that semantic view. So we've exposed a SQL interface for both creating and querying the semantic views. So instead of it just being metadata, that means you can connect other tools to it. And what you're seeing here is kind of the DDL for creating a semantic view. So the new syntax is you say create or replace semantic view. If you remember from my Semantic Views 101 slide, the first thing you define are the base tables that participate in your semantic view. So this DDL here shows, hey, here's the base tables. Here are the relationships, how those tables relate to each other. So those first two blocks of code are describe the schema and the relationships. And then down beneath that, you start defining the things you want to project, your facts, your measures, your dimensions. You'll notice there's a lot of stuff in here like synonyms and comments. Uh, you might not see these in a typical semantic, let's say a BI style semantic model, but the reason we have these in here is this metadata can be used by AI, by LLMs to understand a little bit more about, what does account employees mean? So if the human question is asking for employee count, staff size, number of employees, we can do a much better job of reasoning about those natural language questions and mapping them back to what's in the semantic view. So we really spent a lot of time when we were creating semantic views thinking about what does an AI need to ask questions, and also what does a SQL client need to ask questions, and trying to support both of those in the same object.
It makes a lot of sense. I think some of the things that are really powerful is just even seeing the dimensions kind of laid out here. And these are basically the things that we want to surface into the different interfaces that we have within Hex. And we'll show this in a moment, but even showing just an example of a dimension, maybe like the account owner name. So this is, the sales rep that is owning this particular account from this fake data set. As I scroll down, there's obviously like industry. Then we have these facts and metrics as well, where maybe I go down to opportunities. We can get some, averages around just opportunity ARR, the total, sales opportunity that we have, or opportunity counts. We can weaving in some of these, governed metrics that can be like, Josh, to your point, maybe like net profit or just revenue in general. Super powerful.
Also, I'm seeing a quick question in the chat. Josh, could you tell us about the difference between facts and metrics in a semantic view?
Yes, I was about to type it, but it's easier to just say it. So you can view a fact as a logical element that's at the grain of the table that it's defined on. And a metric is always going to be an aggregate function. So a fact might be, you can define a fact on your customer table, and that fact might be total revenue. You can actually, so when you define a fact like total revenue at the customer level, what you're saying is I want to calculate the total revenue for that customer, but I want it to be persisted at the grain of the customer. And what that allows you to subsequently do is do some interesting things like show me sales for customers where the customer total revenue is greater than 100. So the simple way to think about it is a fact is a value that is at the grain of the base table it's assigned to, and a metric is always going to be an aggregate function.
Awesome. Thank you.
Maybe we jump into Hex and see how we can start exploring some of these
Let's do it.
metrics, facts, dimensions. Cool. So we'll jump over here on the Hex side. This is kind of Hex's landing page. We'll revisit this towards the end. But maybe I first flash kind of the art of what's possible within Hex. So we just showcased, development and the Snowflake side of creating all these metrics, dimensions, the ability to have these governed assets. And some of the ways we would actually want to ingest this could take shape in many different forms. We talked about a few, like a dashboard, a notebook, a chat with your data, a chat bot. In this case, we're going to first focus on something that resembles more of like a dashboard or analytical data app, where we have our same sort of B2B sales data, and I look at revenue and I look at marketing metrics here. Let's focus on revenue to start. As I scroll down to give you guys a little bit of familiarity with the data itself, we can look at, say, our sum of ARR over our close dates. We have a metric that's tracking our on-target earnings that we would try to be targeting for, and we can break this down by our different segment types. In this case, it's an enterprise, mid-market, other SMB, and strategic ones. All to say, this is basically the final app that you would give out to, say, the sales manager, maybe the CFO, whoever it may be that wants to ingest this sort of information. But I want to shift focus, and we'll revisit this in a bit, is actually the back end of how we created all this, right? Many of you folks are probably practitioners, you have data in your title. How can we turn something that's super technical into this final data app that's very presentable to, say, the CFO? So in this case, it's the same exact app I'm looking at, but we'll take a look kind of under the hood. And every single Hex app that you would create has two parts. The first part being the notebook. This is that kind of first pillar where the technical folks come in and do all their work. And then we can go ahead and translate all this, and we'll show you guys how to do this with the app builder here in a moment. But looking at and focusing first on the notebook, we can see that we have these revenue tabs and marketing tabs. These kind of parallel those two tabs that we have on the app side. But if I jump into one of these revenue tabs, I can see I can get direct access to my Snowflake table. I'm pointing to my prod data warehouse, And I can start operating against our opportunities information. We have our opportunity ID, account name. This is this kind of raw interface, if you will, where I can just do any sort of off-roading if I want in terms of my analytics. What's needed with Hex, I can get back this opportunities data frame. By default, it will be a pandas data frame under the hood, which then allows me to actually weave this into continuous SQL or Python cells. So I can jump into a net new SQL cell, do some selection, some querying, some where clauses, whatever I want to do this kind of transformative work. I can also jump into something like our Python cells. So here we're using Hex as kind of nice little creature comforts where I can actually point to different cells that reference it. This is our chaining of cell types. But I can jump into something a little bit more sophisticated here, where I actually want to provide a forecasting model. In this case, I'll use a profit model against these opportunities that we have. This is an ask that came from our sales team where they wanted to be able to more accurately predict the forecasts from these opportunities that we're getting. And you'll notice that I'm actually pointing to that same opportunities table from above. So in this case, in this world, I'm kind of going a little bit off-road, but I have this ability to kind of chain all of the different nuances between SQL cells or Python cells. And plus, as I scroll up, we have the ability to have all of these native visualizations. So I'm not reliant on a charting library. I can just go ahead, mix and match however I would like. Now with that, as I kind of scroll up here, notice we haven't brought in semantic modeling yet. What about all that governance that we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes or so? So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and I'll actually show you how most of this app was built out. So we'll first start by just exploring maybe how we can even find or surface the semantic model within this notebook. So I go to my data browser. I have my warehouse, which gives me all the information or that are kind of the underlying tables that can be accessible to me. But let's say I am just somewhat data savvy. Maybe I'm new to the data team. I'm not super intimate with my entire schema or that I have set up. I can jump into my models. In this case, will be this sales and customer model, the exact same one we were seeing from the Snowflake side.
Also,
And I can click in this
we're still
opportunity.
seeing the revenue tab
The revenue tab.
in the notebook.
Oh, interesting. You guys see the data browser here?
Yeah, I think we're good now. It says querying
A little bit delayed.
model.
Yes. Okay. So maybe a slight delay.
Yes, slight delay.
Cool. Can you guys see the left-hand pane here where it says data browser?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So here in this case, I can go ahead and start exploring against my opportunities table, or maybe I want to preview this data set. And you'll notice immediately those measures and those dimensions that were on the Snowflake side actually got brought over. And this was something that we've kind of configured ahead of time, but it's just a few little clicks away. But I can go ahead and actually look at all of that additional metadata, the same information that Josh was mentioning around the comments we provide or the synonyms, right? That metadata can be brought over into Hex. And those relationships, right? The really kind of key to a lot of these nuanced data questions is the ability to join these tables behind the scenes. So in this case, those relationships come over where I can actually map opportunities to my accounts table, and it will provide me with saying, hey, this is a many-to-one relationship between these two data sets. If I did want to do additional exploration on this, I can simply just add it to my project. And here now we've entered this net new explore cell in Hex. This is kind of being a moment here, but within our notebooking experience, we really want to pride ourselves on having a very high floor, meaning or high ceiling, excuse me, meaning you can do things with like ML modeling and making this profit model, whatever it may be. But we also have a very low floor. So anyone that is remotely data savvy can start getting a lot of access out of a notebook that maybe traditionally you wouldn't find with other notebooks out there. But here I can go ahead and ask a question, something like, maybe I want to look at our first touch source. I can drag and drop this to my x-axis. I want to look at the opportunity count, one of those metrics we defined earlier. So trigger a query under the hood, all powered or governed by this semantic model. And I can even maybe say I want to group by or color by, excuse me, our account segment type. I can maybe edit this if I'd like to be y-axis descending, and we have a nice cleaner representation of this.
Armin, a moment ago when you were in the data browser and you were showing us how the measures and dimensions kind of get ported over, I think because we know a lot of different personas work in Hex, so folks might be wondering, like, do they need a Snowflake login to be able to then like access and see these metrics, or is this like something everyone in Hex can see?
Yeah, that's a great question. Today you don't, and moving forward you won't either. This is basically if you have a Hex seat or a Hex login, you can get access. This is a good call out though for folks that are maybe a little bit more security conscious or want to bleed in that Snowflake role from their warehouse that they've created. You can connect to Hex via OAuth, which will allow you to basically pass in your Snowflake role and authenticate. So if we wanted to share this out, right, we could have that additional layer of security that I'm not going to leak any data that a particular person without my Snowflake role doesn't get access to.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure you'll probably get to this in just a moment, but like these insights are really cool in the notebook and we can kind of really see how powerful it is. And I am wondering how then like this translates to the data app that you were showing at the start.
Yeah, maybe right before we jump into that, we can touch on some of the kind of neat AI features within Hex, within the notebook for, again, that kind of data savvy persona or maybe data scientist. So maybe I jump into what we call our kind of agentic notebooking experience, where I can go ahead and ask a question. You'll see we've kind of done some initial testing here, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new thread. And maybe I want to ask a question. It's a little bit more verbose. That's something like break down our S1 opportunities. These are just early stage opportunities, kind of some special nomenclature, if you will, for our internal verbiage. But I can say break down these opportunities by segment and tell me where they were sourced from, something like this. I can go ahead and trigger this. At this point, what's happening behind the scenes is triggering a bunch of things. So some of the kind of valuable context to Joss's point, right? Those kind of synonyms, the metadata, but we kind of take it one step further where you probably have a lot of really built out complex workflows in these notebooks. Think about your transformations, your data cleaning, right? The different variable types you maybe are using. So what we do is we actually pass that to this kind of agentic notebooking workflow, as well as with having the context of your actual Snowflake warehouse. So we basically piecemeal all of this together with some unique prompting behind the scenes, and we give it additional context just to make sure that we can actually have a full picture of the work you're working with. So in this case, we have this kind of Optis data frame that was mentioned above, and it gives me a nice little breakdown of the thought process that this particular kind of agent wants to go through. It can look at our current S1 pipeline. It gives us a preview of how many opportunities are there. It says it's 18. And eventually you can ask, how much further do you want to go? What do you want me to do with this? And I can say, create me a SQL cell, or SQL query for this, something like that. We'll trigger this. Again, think about it. It understands the context of both the warehouse as well as the existing variables and SQL Python charting that you have in the notebook. Great. It gave me an option. I can go ahead and copy this. Maybe I want to come down and just throw this into a SQL cell. At this point, we'll go ahead and run it. We get our answer back. You'll notice, again, it's chaining that same data frame from above because it has this kind of context aware of our notebooking experience. I can quickly go ahead and visualize this if I want in a chart. And here we are, we get this nice little visual representation. Blending the world again between having notebooks being there for like SQL and Python workflows, but bleeding in this kind of AI code assistant, much like maybe if you software engineers on the line or folks who have played around with Cursor, but again, with that lens around data science and data savvy personas.
I mean, you were saying that this agentic sidebar is like context aware. So is it able to like reference the semantic models?
That is coming. That is not something currently available. It is definitely top of mind. And again, this is going back to the idea around having governance across any sort of interface or surface within Hex itself. With that, maybe we showcase quickly how you can turn these kind of technical assets or these SQL cells, Python cells into that final data app that we were highlighting. So maybe I go back to this revenue tab and we start scrolling down, and Hex by default will go ahead and auto create this data app that you see on the right-hand side. But if I wanted to tweak it, right, how can we do this? A really simple and quick way to do this is just by going through this kind of split screen view. I can hover over this kind of icon that allows me to add the particular cells of interest into my app builder. So if I wanted to remove this or add this particular visualization, it's a simple click away. I can add it back in. It will respect its location based on the notebook ordering. I can drag it and drop it down towards the bottom. I can go back into my app builder at this point, and I can go ahead and style this however I would like. You have different types of filtering you can add. You can change the colors, a bunch of the kind of customization features that you may want. And additionally, if I wanted to add any particular cells, I can very quickly just drop them in, and any changes that were reflected on the app builder side will be automatically reflected on the notebook and vice versa. It's kind of this two-part experience where you can take raw insights in the matter of seconds or minutes. You can turn it into this kind of clean representative data app that could take the form of, say, analytical white paper, a dashboard, whatever it may be.
Yeah, this is awesome, Armin. I feel like we have a lot of teams using Hex really as like an insights fast lane, exactly for the reason that you were describing, where this workflow just really helps folks speed up time to insight. And so I guess I'm just wondering, what about some other like less technical personas? Like, how do they typically interact with a data app like this? Like, what can they do with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we go back to the data app itself, let's say I'm now a sales manager. I'm looking at these kind of new AR targets. I can see we're trending above pace, which is great. But maybe I want to do some additional exploration, right? Going back to this idea around like quick questions, or are these assets static? Do they allow me to have, one governed metrics that I can explore upon? But how accessible is it to me? So what we want to do here is, let's say I have this kind of explore result where we're looking at forecasted revenue across our opportunities. We have our different sales stages here, and we can see here that there's a few opportunities that are emitted, some are best case, some are actually committed revenue that we think we're going to close on. But maybe I want to see where these are actually generated from. I can open up this Explore cell. Now I'm out of the context of a notebook at this point, but I'm operating against that same opportunities semantic model here. So we're bleeding this kind of governance across both aspects, both the very technical ones and then also this data app experience. And you'll notice as I kind of drop this down, we have those relationships to the accounts table. We have our accounts to customers table that we infer. This allows me to actually come in here and act and start doing that same sort of exploration without ever having to go back to the notebook. So if I wanted to color this by first touch source, simple as a drop. Maybe I want to understand, how are their conferences actually generating some of these opportunities that we see? We see trials is performing really, really well. We see conferences as kind of a weakening in our stage 2 and stage 3 pipelines. Demo requests are still staying pretty strong for stage 1, so on and so forth. And I'm able to do this kind of drag and drop exploration without ever having to go revisit or ask additional questions of my data team just to slice and dice this data on my behalf.
Yeah, I really think the beauty of this like no code, very intuitive Explore interface is that it also just frees up time for the data team to be able to really focus on high value assets that they're building.
Definitely, definitely.
Amazing. Well, I did want to bring the conversation a little bit back towards semantic modeling, because I think a lot of teams in the past have tried maybe creating semantic models and it didn't quite live up to the hype. Like it was always a lot of work to set up. And then even after that, it didn't always like really deliver on its promise of like unlocking the kind of self-service that people wanted. And so I guess I'm curious to ask like Josh, Carlos, or I mean, like, what do you think makes Snowflake semantic views different and also like Hex's integration different from experiences folks have had in the past with semantic models?
I'm happy to share a perspective, but then would also love to hear what Armin and Carlos have to say. I think there's maybe a few things there's some things that are the same and some things that are different. What's the same is I do think that there is an element of kind of curation that is important for semantic models. And in the past, that has been a challenge. Anything that is, requires curation or maintenance can get out of date. And so kind of getting the value of a semantic model involves putting in some effort to make sure it's maintained and stays up to date. Some things that have changed. One, I think that the demand for AI-powered analytics experiences has made the return on investment for maintaining a high-quality semantic model a lot higher. The potential for scale and really taking advantage of it has probably changed the economics as well as the kind of customer motivation to make this investment. And so I think for the same reason that we're getting great customer response, I think the kind of the effort and investment customers will make to unlock these AI experiences is going to be there. The other thing, maybe also related to AI, is we have experienced and have kind of built a bunch of capabilities around automating the creation of the semantic model. So in Snowflake today, we have lots of great signals from things like our query history that tell us these are the types of queries that people tend to run against these base tables. And so instead of starting from scratch, you can say, hey, go mine query history for this group of users for the past month and tell me what the semantic model actually is. Tell me what are the dimensions, what are the metrics that are calculated, what are the filters that are used. And we've experienced like really good success in automating the creation of the semantic model. And then you can use that same technique to identify changes in the underlying data. So what used to be probably a very manual process of keeping these things maintained, there's still maybe a human in the loop, but it can be much more automated. Um, so I think those things kind of change the economics for what have been past hurdles. The final thing I would say is, and maybe I've harped on this a few times already, this kind of loop of uh, sharing curated semantic models or concepts with users, having those users interact, having kind of the interaction with a semantic model through a tool like Hex actually contribute back to the model, I think is really, really powerful. And so instead of it just being a one-way projection that says this is the data, it's more like here's the data, interact with it. What did you learn along the way? And now push that back into the definition. So like turning it into a loop versus a one-way street, I think makes that maintenance and value a lot more evergreen.
Yeah, I love what
Yeah.
you said about the loop, and I feel like I have to jump in and ask Carlos to tell us a little bit more about Hex's semantic layer strategy and sort of like the vision for authoring and what that loop looks like as well.
Sure. Also, just wanted to sort of plus one to what Josh said, that I think what's been really high leverage and the reason for so much demand for semantic views inside of Hex is that Hex really supports a lot of different stakeholders. You've got very technical users, you've got self-service users, you've got everybody collaborating in a single platform. So this is a very high leverage investment. You have one integration that is serving all of these different surfaces, from those low code sort of interfaces that you're seeing to the notebook. You get that one integration and that same source of truth across a lot of these different surfaces, which is super, super powerful. I mean, data teams are sort of at a crossroads right now, and I think they now have this new job to be done. We saw this, maybe 5 years ago, where data teams were being asked to orchestrate these pipelines, and we had warehouse native tools like dbt come out to help support those workflows. They're now being asked to be AI engineers. There's this new whole domain that they have to start managing. And we see semantic models as a key tool to being able to curate the knowledge so that AI can be really, really successful. And I think that's another sort of reason for the increase in demand is like we need these tools to curate the knowledge to make AI successful. And it's not just self-service users clicking around in a self-service interface. So, we have demand from agents. There's tons of surfaces where this context can go. And that's really how we see Hex as like really providing the tools to manage that context long term. So things on the roadmap are like the ability to author semantic models right in Hex, and down the road sync those back to your various sources of truth, like back into Snowflake semantic views. There's a question of where your source of truth for semantic models should be. And I think Snowflake is a great place to put that if that workflow suits you. But it's sort of like asking, where should your definition for customer be? Like it might be in Snowflake, or it might be in Salesforce, it might be in HubSpot, but probably it's in both, and those have to be interoperable. So there's been teams that have been demanding the ability to keep their source of truth for semantic models inside of Hex. And we want to make that a possibility, but we think that source of truth has to be shared between every surface where you need AI. So Hex, I think, is singularly committed from the front end tools to being really, really interoperable and supporting multiple semantic layers, allowing you to create the source of truth within Hex itself, but also sync that to wherever that source of truth may be. And I really see that as the future. This curated context being able to be synced to all of the surfaces where AI needs to be, because that's the demand. The demand is not for a single place where AI happens and it only happens in that one place. Every single product is going to need to have these capabilities. And it's going to need to have the context to be able to, surface the right answers at the right place for the right user when they're in that experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like you both really touched on some of the changes and like the economics, and that's what makes it different this time around compared to in the past with experiences folks have had with semantic models. Armin, was there anything else you had wanted to weigh in on with that question? Or
Something that I've been seeing with joint customers that we've been chatting with is people are starting to get a lot of adoption with semantic models, or especially with semantic views, is just the simplicity to get started. To Josh's point of trying to like automate this process, or even just where do I start? Like I want a chatbot. There's this mandate from the board or from C-suite, and you're kind of just like throwing all these resources at making a chatbot. And you're kind of just like sprinting at it. And then you start realizing, oh, maybe I do need a semantic model, or like it would be really wise for me to do it. So then you're like, okay, let's go try to figure out where do I start. And I think that's that bridging the gap that is seeing a lot of interest or a lot of demand for integrations that we're doing or just semantic views in general, because it's just still new. Like semantic modeling has been around for years, but a lot of people haven't adopted it for many different reasons. But I think this is kind of the new wave or a new age realization of why they're so important. So it's exciting to see. And I think just interfaces like or front end experiences like Hex, where we can weave that into catering to many different audiences, is super critical to actually get this from a dev environment or just kind of like sandboxing to actually being productionalized internally.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, with the time we have left, I think we'll just shift into audience Q&A. I will kick it off. I want to sneak in one more question, give folks some time to also add more questions into the Q&A box. So the first question I wanted to ask was for Josh. I think we saw in the poll at the start that like majority of folks on this call are actually just getting started with semantic modeling. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for what you think the ideal semantic modeling strategy is for like how to get started, how to approach it, how to get like the team aligned with like the data they need to curate to kind of set themselves up for success.
I have a very tactical piece of advice, and I can paste it in the window. We have a quick start, which is a great way to get started and actually build your first semantic model and experience it. From a practical perspective, what I see with customers doing is picking a use case, picking a domain in particular. I was talking with a customer earlier today that has a particular modeling challenge that today is a little bit messy. And so they've started by kind of modeling that in a semantic view and kind of doing an internal proof of concept that shows that they can get kind of what we showed on the call here today, this kind of structured data output as well as a talk to your data experience. And so I think scoping a particular domain and use case as a way to get started is what I would advise, and kind of get your hands dirty. My guess is we have a bunch of people on the call here who like to get their hands dirty. Sometimes I find the easiest way is to try building something out. And that's how it gets started.
Awesome. Thank you. Love the tactical advice. A question that I am seeing from the audience, I think it's more Hex specific. It was related to the AI demo that you were giving, Armin. I think it's kind of just a question of like how broad of a prompt can you give like this agentic sidebar? Like, could you just ask it to kind of segment a marketing campaign, for example, and have that kind of have it return like instructions or directions for a step-by-step to get that done?
Yeah. You can give it like very verbose and complicated tasks. I think the bigger thing or the bigger limitations around this is your data modeling upstream. And that comes like how clean is your data? What kind of scope are you allowing your LLMs to view? If you're giving it like every single table in Snowflake, it's probably going to do a really poor job of just doing that initial funnel of trying to understand what certain tables should I actually care about. This also weaves its way into creating a semantic model. If you have a very strong semantic model, you have kind of those guardrails in place, it will do really, really well at answering those questions. I think a dream state, maybe a little bit more tactical, is basically asking, hey, can we use like segmentation by XYZ for some marketing reasons? It can just build out a whole entire Hex app. Like that isn't something today, but that definitely is a future that we want to aspire towards. But again, a lot of that is really gonna come down to just like, is your data quality in check? Like just basics that we still see teams struggling with today. I think that's the bigger kind of hurdle to come to get over rather than it being like capabilities of LLMs or how good agents can get.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that in Hex, there's a lot of tools for curating, so designating trusted resources. And so it's really about the context that you want to feed in. You can feed in a huge amount of context, and that some of it's low quality, some of it's high quality, and then you can ask very broad questions, and recall is probably going to be better. But maybe if you're sort of pointing at raw data and model data, maybe your answers could be inconsistent. So really taking the time to have curated data sets and endorsing those inside of Hex, and those will be fed into the AI. And the same is also true for apps. You can endorse apps, and that is a signal that tells our various magic or AI features that is a validated dashboard that can be used for AI as well.
Awesome. Cool. And we'll just give another couple minutes and see if we have any other questions from the audience trickle in. Again, this is a great time to ask any of our speakers questions that you have on your mind. So we'll see.
I guess one discussion that I constantly keep having conversations with the customers that people that are starting to explore Hex and our integrations and semantic views is, where do I really start? Do I just have this like monolithic semantic view in terms of like even the context is pretty related? Do I just start with my sales data? Like, sure, we want to go after a use case, but what if my use case is this product feature that has, 50 Snowflake tables? Like, is that something that can be realized, or is it a matter for you to start with like 3 to 5 tables? Um, Maybe Josh, you can share your thoughts from what you've seen, and we can share some of ours.
Yeah, without getting into the details of data modeling, if you have 50 tables for a domain, that might be a lot. But I do think starting with a domain versus starting like trying to model a business process or trying to model a function versus trying to model an organization is a good way to start. Kind of that it helps you be focused on kind of the key metrics and dimensions for the use case. And I think is much more manageable. I will mention what I think we're going to see evolve over time, and we actually have a feature we're working on that supports this called kind of composability of semantic views, is that uh, customers will have a number of domain-specific models, and in cases where you want to kind of get a comprehensive view across those multiple domains, you'll be able to kind of union together those models and create kind of an Uber model. Um, But my recommendation would be not to start big. It would be to start small.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see customers who they start a project of modeling data, and it's very tempting that you model an entire, part of your business. But it's not that different than data warehousing has been for the past 15 years. There was the concept of agile data warehouse design, which is like you start with a use case and a user that wants to answer a question, and you take that end to end as much as possible in the narrowest possible cut of data. And that just like ensures that you're going to answer that one use case and then you can expand out from there. So I think that's great advice.
Awesome. We do have a question from the audience. Love this question from Adam. Adam is wondering, is there any advice or best practices surrounding change management for semantic models? And there are two specific obvious scenarios that Adam is thinking about. So one would be if you're trying to improve the model with more verified queries, and that could be a source of change. A second scenario being that the underlying tables themselves have changed slightly, like column names, for example. So do we have any advice for Adam around change management?
I have some thoughts here. I mean, it's not entirely different than, your data pipeline changes. How do you test those changes and validate those changes? You can have, different schemas or different objects with different versions and try to test those end to end. I sort of tease this a little bit in the semantic authoring that we're building. We're going to have the ability to preview. So you're going to be able to stage changes to the semantic model and see how the behavior of the AI changes ahead of deployment. You can do that by pointing at different data sets. There's two questions here. There's one around metadata management and one around data management. And so if you can sort of stage this additional metadata, see how the AI performs, and also point at different schemas. So I mean, we're looking at building tools around that. Josh, also curious, I'm sure you've heard this requirement before, if you have thoughts on it.
I have heard it. In fact, and I kind of agree with your answer. I think the way you want to manage a semantic view in Snowflake is the way you would manage other things like your data models and pipelines. Internally, we actually are doing this. Our data science teams are now including semantic views as part of their DBT models. So the DBT model they're using to do the source control, the management, the development workflow is all kind of wrapped around DBT. So I think that would be a common approach. The thing about adding verified queries, that's in Snowflake today, we have some support for that in terms of feedback from end users, where authorized users can add verified queries back to the model. We have done some level of automation of this, where I mentioned kind of looking at query history. We have a process which is in private preview right now, that actually mines query history. It turns the queries into natural language questions by looking at the SQL, and then it uses those natural language questions to go back and ask the semantic model, can you answer this question? And then it compares that with the original SQL. And so, and then it enriches the model over time with additional metadata. So there are some things where we're seeing success of like an agentic approach to evolving models and improving them kind of without human intervention.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I think that's about the time that we have. So I want to wrap it up and just really thank everyone for tuning in and asking some great questions in the chat. I also want to really thank all of our speakers for giving us such a thorough deep dive into semantic views and into Hex as like the best front end for exploring and analyzing your Snowflake data models. So I've left some links to additional resources in the chat. If you are based in New York City or you just like happen to be around the city next week, we are actually hosting a hackathon with Snowflake. And so that will be next Tuesday. If you're excited about what you saw in today's webinar and you just want to get more hands-on, this hackathon is a great opportunity to try building out semantic views, to network with the New York City data community and really put your skills to the test. Carlos, Hermine, and I will be there, so you can also come and meet us in person. And then finally, if you have more questions that come up later that you think of, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. I will also drop that into the chat right now. And then alternatively, you can also shoot me an email and I will help to route to the right person. And so my email is nicole@hex.tech, which I've also included in the details in the chat. So otherwise, I think that is a wrap. Again, really appreciate everyone for coming. And we had a really full 1 hour session. So hope to see you all next time. Thank you.